Words like Christian and church and preacher are extremely loaded terms these days. They come with all kinds of tropes and preconceived notions and baggage. Sometimes just using the word Jesus, without it being a swear word, is enough to totally change someone's opinion of you. We've been working our way through Paul's letter to the Philippian church over the past bunch of Thursdays, and I hope it's been eye-opening, at least a little bit, to see Christianity a little bit differently for you. We've already covered the history of the letter. We've talked about the people in it, the reason for it, the heart behind it, and we're moving into more of the meat section of the letter, where we take it apart line by line. And if you have not watched all of those, feel free to jump onto my YouTube page because they're all on there now, so you can catch up. So let's read the section of the letter that we're in right now. It's Philippians chapter 1, verses 15 to 18, and it says this: "Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether it in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice." The part I want to concentrate on today is that first part. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. I've said for the past few weeks now that it is amazing that when this letter was written, Paul, the great missionary that maybe the greatest missionary ever, could not travel because he was under house arrest, and he'd been so for 2 years. Last week I talked about how even though it looked like when they locked up Paul that would like kill the spread of the gospel, it actually had the opposite effect. And the story of Paul's false imprisonment actually worked to inspire more people to stand up in Rome and talk about Jesus, even though it was going to get them in trouble. But Paul, it seems that he'd been hearing some stories of what was happening outside the prison, and it seems that among these newly inspired missionaries, not everyone had the best motives. Some, it seems, were preaching as a way to try to steal Paul's thunder or capitalize on his imprisonment and make their own ministry grow, or even as a way to make Paul look bad. It seems that, and I know this is going to come as a shock to you, not everyone who talks about Jesus is that good of a person. That's what I want to talk about today. Words like Christian and church and preacher are extremely loaded terms these days. They come with all kinds of tropes and preconceived notions and baggage. Sometimes just using the word Jesus, without it being a swear word, is enough to totally change someone's opinion of you. I used to have that problem a lot when I was a full-time pastor. I'd go to a function, whatever function I was invited to. I'd try to meet the new friends or whoever was there, had invited me to mill around. And I do my best not to talk about my job. I'm not very good in groups as it is, but I had this handicap where the moment anyone found out what I did for a living, it would almost completely break the conversation. I'd bump into someone, we'd start the usual pleasantries, right? How are you? Have you seen the weather? Have you heard about sports? How do you know the host? But inevitably, the conversation always comes around to, and what do you do for a living? Now, that's a normal enough question. It's a good question when you want to get to know someone, how they spend a majority of their time. But in my case, it was often the end of the conversation. The moment I said, well, I'm pastor of so-and-so church, the reaction was almost always the same. If it was a Christian, they'd say, oh, neat. And we talked about the church and the history of the church and all the stuff going on, all Christian-y stuff. But if they weren't a believer, their posture changed. Their tone of voice changed. And 90% of the time, the next thing to come out of their mouth was the words, oh, I'm sorry. Almost like clockwork. When I told people I was a pastor or a preacher, they would respond with, oh, I'm sorry. And I'd always say, what are you sorry for? And I usually got one of three answers. Either, I'm sorry for swearing. I didn't realize because they had been swearing along with the conversation. Or, I'm sorry for the people around you because they're not religious. You must be very uncomfortable. Or more commonly, and this is the most common one, they would say, I'm not really sure, sorry. And then they suddenly remember they had something to do and they'd walk away. It happened constantly. The same thing happens to a lot of people who share their faith with others for the first time, or they say that they're going to church now, or they say they're reading the Bible, or they start talking about Jesus. They could be talking to a friend they've known forever. They could be talking to a family member, and still the mood of the conversation shifts. Now, why? Why is there such a strong reaction? Now, I've talked to a lot of people about this, especially ones that, they gave me that I'm sorry reaction, and maybe they got to know me a little bit better, and I was able to, ask them about that. People inside the church, people outside the church. And I've come up with one good answer as to why there's such a strong reaction when someone drops the C word or the J word. The reason is because that person has met someone who called themselves a Christian but didn't live up to their expectations, got caught doing something they shouldn't have been doing, or maybe even hurt them. In other words, in their experience, Christians, pastors, churches, Jesus people are all hypocrites. Or to be more accurate, that person didn't live up to what they thought a Christian is supposed to be. They expected when they heard the word Christian that this person would always tell the truth. They always had good motives. They always shared whatever they had. They always spoke kind words. They never felt jealous or angry or lustful or greedy. Their expectation of a Christian is this person who doesn't have any vices, doesn't have bad habits, has all the correct political opinions, whatever that means. And everything they do is motivated by acceptance and love and full support of whatever makes people happy. And they never judge anybody. They'd never purposefully hurt anybody. For them, that's what a Christian is supposed to be, and not a single Christian, not a single pastor, not anybody who's claimed the name of Jesus has ever met those expectations. All Christians, all pastors, all religious people, they're all kind of painted with the same brush because they're all untrustworthy. They say one thing and they do another. In other words, their words, their gospel, their Bible, all the things they say they believe can't be trusted. They can't be trusted, and their religion can't be trusted. They are all hypocrites. Because if it was true, then if Jesus really did change their heart, if he really did make bad people into good people, if Christians really were all about love, then their life would look so much different. But they know what their life looks like, and they know that they're a hypocrite. Just like what Paul says here. He's been arrested for sharing the gospel of Jesus, and he's inspired Christians all over Rome to boldly proclaim their faith to the city. But then we immediately learn that some of these new missionaries have bad motives. When they're out there talking about Jesus, it is not to help people meet God. Maybe that's part of it, but the real reason is because they're jealous of Paul's popularity. They want to make him look bad by getting a bigger crowd than him. When they stand on stage in front of this big group or whatever, on the outside, they're talking about the love of God and the importance of Christ and sacrifice. But on the inside, they're thinking, oh man, I'm so cool. Look at all these people. I'm so much better than Paul. I'm so glad he's in prison. Finally, I get the spotlight. I hope Paul hears about this. I hope he's so jealous. I hope he rots in that prison so I can finally get what I deserve. In other words, there's a chunk of these people that are hypocrites. Here's the thing I'm getting at. There are two lessons I want to pull out of this section, this scripture, this concept. And the first is to talk to the non-Christians that are listening. Let me say this. Christians aren't perfect, and we will never be this side of heaven. Sometimes when you think of a Christian, you hear that I'm a pastor, you hear that this is a family-friendly channel, that we're dedicated to God's truth, that you walk into a church, or even not walk into a church, but you bump into somebody who goes to church. Sometimes you think in your mind of like a museum, right? Everything is clean and organized and interesting and beautiful. The people are well dressed. They're behaving themselves. Everyone's talking softly. Everyone's nodding in humble silence. All the people you talk to there are experts. Each piece is placed with precision. Each room meant to inspire. And the whole point of this place is to inspire the world. In your mind, that's what a church is. That's what a Christian's all about. It's like a museum. But that's not what a church is. That's not what a group of Christians is. And what I want you to do is change your metaphor whenever you meet a Jesus person. The church, any group of Christians, isn't a museum. It's a hospital. It's a place designed for sick people to come and find healing. But like any other hospital, it's only, semi-organized and often a frantic mess. They're understaffed, they're underfunded, they're overwhelmed. The ones that are there to help are doing their best, but everything is always changing, and sometimes they get sick too. I think it'd be crazy to walk into a hospital and get upset that it's full of sick and needy and grumpy and addicted and messed up people, right? It would be cruel to walk into a hospital room and go up to the person lying in bed and say, "How dare you call yourself a hospital person? This is a place of healing. People come here to get better. And how dare you claim to be one of the doctor's patients? If you really knew the doctor, you'd never act sick. You'd never relapse. You'd never catch an illness. Your doctor must be a total quack. Look how many sick people he is surrounded by. All you hospital people are just hypocrites." See, that'd be nuts, right? Well, that's Christianity. It's not a group of people who think they're better than everyone else. It's a group of people who've realized how sick they are and have come to Dr. Jesus to be healed. But the disease of sin has affected every part of their heart, mind, body, and soul, and that kind of healing takes time. You wouldn't go up to someone who's in the middle of a cancer treatment and ask them why they're not better yet. Why hasn't the cancer gone away yet? In the same way, you shouldn't look at a Christian and ask them why they're not perfect yet. Sometimes the only difference between a Christian and a non-Christian is that the Christian has realized that they're sick, that they need help, and they're willing to submit to the doctor. Well, the non-Christian is pretending they're not sick at all. Sometimes that's the only difference. Now, second, I want to talk to the believers that are listening. Guys, we need to realize that every time we talk about Jesus, we are fighting an uphill battle against the culture around us. Every time we bow our heads to pray at a restaurant, every time we bring up the Bible in a conversation, every time we say we'll pray for someone, every time we put our Bible verses on our shirt or on our fridge or on the walls of our home, we're inviting judgment and criticism. Most people don't see these things and think, wow, that person's a Christian? They must be so trustworthy, such a wonderful person. No, they immediately put up their guard. We need to be mindful of that. We need to be mindful that the culture doesn't understand our Christianese terms. They're not impressed by our external religious stuff. We need to realize that no one in our culture would ever consider coming to the church for help because they don't see us as a place of rescue. They see us as a place of judgment and hypocrisy. Some even see a place of danger. Now, you remember what the scriptures call us, right? They call us ambassadors for Christ. That means that when we're walking around, we're representatives of his kingdom. That means we need to be not only talking the talk, but walking the walk. We need to wrap our heads around the fact that we will never get permission to share the gospel with the people around us in any meaningful way until we do the very, very hard work of loving our neighbor, winning their friendship, building their trust, and earning the right to speak to them about our faith. And that takes time. That takes sacrifice. That takes consistency. And I need you to realize that and commit your life to those principles, to changing your perception of the outside world and changing how you live in it.